You want to know the strangest thing about that morning? It started boring. That's the part nobody believes when I tell them. People expect me to say there was a feeling in the air, like the sky knew. There wasn't. It was just a flat, GREY London Tuesday. The kind of day where you almost don't bother taking a photo because everything looks like a postcard somebody already printed a million times. I was standing on the corner near the edge of HYDE Park by the gates with a cheap coffee going cold in my hand, and I almost didn't stay. That's the thing that wakes me up at night sometimes. I almost walked the other way. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter much, but I'll give it to you so this feels real. Call me Marcus. I was 43 that year on my own, 3 days into a trip I'd booked on a whim after my divorce went through. Everybody told me, go somewhere. Get out of the flat. So I picked London because my mum used to talk about it like it was made of gold, and she never got to go before she passed. So there I was, a man drinking bad coffee, missing his mother, in a city that didn't know him. And across the road, near the route the guards take, stood a young man in a red tunic and a tall black bearskin hat, not moving an inch. I want to describe him properly, because later everyone would be describing him, and most of them got it wrong. He was tall, but not in a way that made you nervous. Lean. The uniform almost looked too crisp for him, like he hadn't grown all the way into it yet. The chin strap of that big black hat cut a hard line under his bottom lip, and his eyes, I only saw them later up close, were this pale, washed-out blue. The COLOUR of the sky behind the clouds that morning, actually. I didn't know his name then. I learned it after. Private Thomas Ellery. Tom, his mates called him, 23 years old. From a little town up north I'd never heard of, the kind of place where everybody's dad worked the same job and everybody's mum knew your business. But that morning he was just the guard to me. One of those statues that aren't statues. You know the ones. Tourists love them. They stand right up next to them, pull faces, wave their hands, try to make them laugh. And the guards just stare through it all, like the rest of us aren't even there. I watched a group of teenagers do exactly that. 3 of them, maybe 15, 16 years old, all phones out, giggling. One of them got real close and shouted boo right in his face. Tom didn't blink. I remember thinking, how do you train a person to do that? To stand there while the whole world pokes at you and just hold. Just hold. I couldn't have done it. I get annoyed when somebody chews loud on a train. The crowd was thick that day. Tour buses had emptied out near the corner, and there was that low, constant noise crowds make, not loud, just busy. Bits of a dozen languages floating past. A woman with a pram trying to get through. A man selling little Union Jack flags from a cart, the cheap ones that bend in the wind. I remember the flags because of what happened to them later. There was a family near me. American like me, I could tell from the dad's loud, easy voice. 2 little kids, a boy maybe 7 and a girl a bit younger, and the mum kept telling them not to run. The little girl had a red balloon. Bright red, the same red as the guard's tunic almost, and she kept letting the string out a little and yanking it back, watching it bob. I smiled at her. She stuck her tongue out at me, kids. The dad was trying to take a photo with all 4 of them and the guard in the background. He kept fussing with the angle. Stand still, you're cutting his hat off. Normal stuff. The boring, lovely, normal stuff. That photo never got finished. So here's where it changes. And I've told this part so many times now I have to be careful, because the more you tell a story, the more your brain wants to make it neater than it was. Real life isn't neat. Real life is messy and fast, and half the time you don't understand what you're looking at until it's already over. It started with a sound. Not a big sound. That's what people don't expect. They imagine some huge movie boom. But the first thing wasn't the explosion. The first thing was a kind of pressure, like when you're on a plane and your ears go funny. The air got thick for half a second. Then the boom. It came from somewhere off to the right, past the gates, deeper toward where the traffic was. I didn't see it happen. I just felt the ground kind of jump up into my feet, and the coffee leapt out of my hand, and a window somewhere, I never found out where, went with this sharp, ugly crack. And then everything got loud at once. Car alarms. All of them, every car for what felt like a mile, screaming together, a dog going mad, and the people. The crowd that had been this gentle busy hum a second ago, it turned into one big animal sound. Screaming, yes, but more than that. A sort of gasp that turned into a roar. Hundreds of people all sucking in breath and then running at the same time. I didn't run, not because I was brave, because my legs forgot what they were for. I just stood there with my empty hand still curled like it was holding the coffee. Smoke, there was smoke now, rolling up GREYBLACK over the rooftops, the wrong COLOUR against that flat sky. The smell hit a second later, sharp and chemical and wrong, the smell of things burning that shouldn't burn. People were pouring past me, knocking into me. Somebody's shoulder spun me half around and I saw, for 1 second, the whole crowd moving like water that's been kicked. No direction, just away, just anywhere that wasn't there. And in the middle of all of it, I found him again. Tom, the guard. He hadn't moved. I want you to picture this properly, because this is the image I'll have in my head until the day I die. Everything was chaos. The flag cart was knocked over, those little Union Jacks scattered across the wet pavement getting trampled. The man selling them was gone. The woman with the pram was screaming for somebody. And in the middle of all that running, terrified humanity, there was one still point. A young man in a red coat and a tall black hat, standing exactly where he'd been standing, spine straight, rifle held the way they hold it, eyes forward. He hadn't run. He hadn't even flinched, not that I could see. The whole world was coming apart, and he was holding the line of his own body like it was the only thing left that the rules still applied to. I didn't understand it. Part of me, the honest part, the cowardly part, thought, "What is wrong with you? Run, you idiot, run like the rest of us." But he didn't, and I couldn't stop watching him. Then I heard the crying. It cut through everything the way a child's cry does, high and broken and right nearby. I turned, and it was the little girl, the American family, the little girl with the red balloon, except she didn't have the balloon anymore. It was up above her, the string snapped or let go, drifting up into the smoke, this bright, cheerful red thing floating up over the worst morning of all our lives. She was on the ground. She'd been knocked down or fallen in the stampede, and she was right in the open, right in the path of all those running feet, this tiny thing in a yellow coat, and her parents weren't there. I looked. I looked everywhere in that half second. The dad was nowhere. The mum was being carried backward by the crowd, screaming a name I couldn't hear, her arms out, fighting against 100 bodies that were all pushing the other way. And the little girl just sat there, frozen, the way kids freeze. She wasn't even trying to get up. She had her hands over her ears and her mouth open, and the crowd was about to go right over the top of her. I started toward her. I swear I did. But I was 20 feet away, and there were people between us, and I was slow. I was so slow, my body still half made of stone. I wasn't going to make it. But somebody else was already moving. You know how I told you the guard hadn't moved? Through the explosion, through the screaming, through all of it, that statue of a man holding his post. He moved now. I saw the exact second he broke. I saw his head turn, just his eyes first, then his head, and lock onto that little girl on the ground. And I saw something cross his face that I can't really describe. It wasn't fear. It was more like a decision, like a door opening and closing in the same instant. And then Private Thomas Ellery, 23 years old, who had stood like stone while the ground shook, dropped his post and ran. Not away, toward. He covered that ground faster than I would have believed. That heavy uniform, those boots, that ridiculous tall hat, none of it slowed him. He went through the crowd like he was the only solid thing in it, shoulder down, one arm out, just pushing people aside. and the whole time his eyes never left her. I heard him shout something, one word, I think it was just G.O., at the crowd, at everyone, get back, get away, G.O. And then he reached her. I'll tell you what he did, and I'll tell you it plain, because it doesn't need dressing up. He didn't scoop her up gentle like in the films. There wasn't time. He got down, got one arm around her and pulled her in against his chest and turned his own body so his back was to the smoke, to whatever might come next, to all of it. He made himself a wall, a red wall with a little girl in a yellow coat tucked inside it. That tall black hat fell off his head. I watched it roll across the pavement and nobody ever picked it up. And he held her, just held her down low, his big shoulders curved right over her, while the crowd thundered past on both sides like a river going around a rock. People knocked into his back. He didn't move. He took every hit and stayed exactly where he was, curled over that child, his head bent down next to hers, and I could see his mouth moving. I found out later what he was saying. The little girl told her mum, and her mum told a reporter, and it went round the whole world after that. He was saying, over and over, very calm, very quiet, "I've got you, you're all right, I've got you, nobody's getting past me." 5 words at a time, just enough. The exact right thing to say to a terrified child, from a terrified man who would not let her see he was terrified. The crowd thinned. It does, eventually. The first panic burns out and people either get away or they stop and look back, and that's what started happening. People stopping, turning, and one by one, like me, finding the same thing to look at. The guard on the ground, curled over a child, not moving. Somebody near me said, "Oh my God," just like that, quiet. And the mum got through. She'd finally torn loose from the crowd and she came scrambling across that open ground on her hands and knees half the way, screaming her daughter's name, Sophie. The name was Sophie. I learned it then, and Tom heard her. He lifted his head. He didn't let go yet. He looked up at this woman coming at him and he just said, "She's all right. She's not hurt, she's all right." And then he opened his arms and let the little girl go, and Sophie scrambled into her mother, and the two of them folded together right there on the wet pavement. And the mum was sobbing and saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," over and over, and reaching out with one hand to grab the guard's arm like she needed to make sure he was real. And Tom, and I'll never forget this, Tom just nodded. Once. Like it was nothing. Like he was embarrassed almost. He got to his feet, this young man with no hat now, his perfect uniform filthy and scuffed, his hair stuck to his forehead with sweat, and he looked around at all of us standing there gawping. And do you know what he did? He walked back to his post. I'm not making that up. I wish I had something more dramatic, but the truth is better than anything I could invent. He picked up nothing. He dusted himself off with 2 quick swipes of his hand, and he walked the 15 feet back to the exact spot where he'd been standing when the world blew up, and he stood there, spine straight, eyes forward, like a man returning to the only thing that made sense. There was still smoke in the sky. There were still sirens now coming from everywhere, getting louder. There were still people crying and bleeding and lost. The morning was nowhere near over. We didn't even know yet what had happened, or whether more was coming, or how bad it was down where the smoke was thickest. But there was a man in a red coat standing at his post like the king himself was watching, and somehow, I can't explain this, somehow that made it feel like the world hadn't ended after all. A few people started to clap. It was strange, wrong almost in all that chaos, but it spread. Just a few hands at first, then more, this ragged, broken applause from a crowd that was still shaking, still crying, and Tom stood there and took it the same way he'd taken being shouted at by teenagers 2 hours before. He didn't smile, he didn't bow, he just stood. And here's where I have to stop for now, because what happened next changed everything, and it's not the part you think. Because that young guard who ran toward the danger, who shielded a stranger's child with his own body, who walked calmly back to his post like it was nothing, that young guard was carrying a secret that morning. Something nobody in that crowd knew. Something even the army didn't fully know yet. And the reason he never flinched, the reason he could stand so still while everyone else ran. It wasn't training. It was something much sadder than that. But that's for part 2, so I told you he was carrying a secret. And I told you it was sadder than training. But I have to be honest with you about something first. I didn't learn any of that on the day. On the day, I knew nothing. On the day he was just a hero in a red coat, and then the police were everywhere and they pushed all of us back behind tape, and I never even got to thank him. Everything I'm about to tell you I learned after, over weeks. Some of it from the news, some of it from a letter, and some of it, the most important bit, from a woman in a tea shop in a small town up north, a year and a half later, who turned out to be his mother. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me slow down. Let me tell it the way I learned it. The morning didn't end when the clapping stopped. I want you to understand that. In the films, the hero does his brave thing and the music swells and it's over. In real life, the brave thing is 1 minute out of a day that goes on for hours and hours. The police moved us back. There was tape, that blue and white tape, miles of it, going up across roads I'd walked down an hour before. There were men in heavy gear I didn't have words for then. There were dogs. There were ambulances backed up so far that some of them just stopped in the middle of the road with their doors open. I sat on a curb 3 streets away for most of that morning because nobody would let me go anywhere and I didn't have anywhere to go. A woman from a cafe brought out a tray of tea, free, just handing cups to strangers, and her hands were shaking so bad she spilled most of it. We all just held our cups and didn't drink. That's what people do. They make tea. Even when the world's on fire, somebody puts the kettle on. And the whole time in my head was that image. The red coat curved over the yellow coat. I've got you. Nobody's getting past me. It was on the news by lunchtime. Of course it was. Half the crowd had been filming before it happened, those teenagers, the dad with his family photo. And the moment a young guard ran into the chaos and shielded a child, that footage went everywhere. By that evening it had a name. The Guardsman of Hyde Park. Somebody put music under it. Somebody always does. For about 2 days, nobody knew who he was. The army doesn't hand out names. He was just a figure in a video, this anonymous lad in a famous uniform, and the whole country sort of adopted him. People left flowers near the spot. People I'd stood next to in that crowd were on the telly crying about him. And then his name came out. Private Thomas Ellery, Tom. And the photo they used wasn't the dramatic one. It was an old one, off some family page, him at maybe 19, grinning, not in uniform at all, in a football shirt, with his arm around a younger boy who had the same washed-out blue eyes. I remember staring at that photo, at the younger boy, because there was something about the way Tom had his arm around him, protective, older brother all over. I didn't know yet that the younger boy was the whole reason for everything. His name was Danny, Daniel Ellery, Tom's little brother, 6 years younger. And 8 months before that morning at Hyde Park, 8 months almost to the day, Danny had died. I'll tell you how, because the how matters, even though it's hard. It wasn't anything dramatic. It wasn't a war or an accident with a story you could tell. It was an illness, the slow kind. The kind that comes in quiet and takes its time and turns a healthy 15-year-old boy into someone who needs help walking to the bathroom over the space of a year. Tom was already in the army by then, already a guardsman, and by all accounts he was good at it, that stillness, that discipline. It came easy to him in a way it doesn't to most. But when Danny got sick, Tom went home as much as they'd let him, took every leave, sat by the bed, read to him, did the voices his mum said. Danny loved it when Tom did the voices. And at the end, and this is the part that took the wind out of me when his mother told me, at the very end, Danny was scared. Of course he was. 15 and dying and scared. And he didn't want to be on his own, and he didn't want to fall asleep because he was frightened he wouldn't wake up. And Tom sat with him, held him, the big brother. And he said his mum heard it through the door. She said she'll never forget it. He said the same words, the exact same words. "I've got you, you're all right, I've got you. Nobody's getting past me. You see it now, don't you?" When that little girl was on the ground in the smoke, frozen, terrified, in a yellow coat, Tom didn't see a stranger. I think in that half-second some part of him saw Danny, saw the one he couldn't save, and his body just moved before his head could stop it. He couldn't stand still for Danny in the end. Nobody could. Some things you can't fight no matter how straight you stand or how still you hold. And I think this is just me talking. I'm not a clever man. I think that's the thing that breaks a person quietly. Not the loss, the helplessness, standing guard over someone and not being able to do a single thing. So when there was finally something to run toward, somebody he could actually get his arms around in time, he ran. He'd been waiting 8 months for a danger he could actually beat. And he beat it. He got there. He was fast enough this time. That's why he could stand so still through the explosion. Not because he was brave. Because the worst thing that could happen to him had already happened 8 months before in a quiet bedroom up north. After Danny, a bomb didn't scare him. What was a bomb? A bomb was nothing. He'd already lost the thing he was most afraid of losing. But I'm jumping ahead again. I keep doing that. Let me get back to the days right after, because the story isn't done, and what happened to Tom after that morning is its own kind of heartbreak. You'd think, wouldn't you, that a young man who did what he did would have nothing but good coming his way. The country loved him. Strangers left flowers. There was talk, actual talk, in the papers of a medal, a real one, the kind that gets pinned on by someone very important indeed. And Tom said no. He didn't say it loudly. He's not a loud person from everything I learned. He just quietly let it be known through the proper channels that he didn't want it. Didn't want the medal, didn't want the interviews, didn't want any of it. He'd done his job, he said. That was all. He'd done his job and a child was all right, and that was the only thing that mattered, and could everyone please leave it now? The papers couldn't understand it. A hero who won't be a hero. They wrote about that almost more than the rescue. Some of them got nasty about it, like he owed them his story. Like the bravest thing he did was somehow theirs to sell. But I understood it once I knew about Danny. He didn't want a medal for saving a child, because every time anyone called him a hero, all he could think was, I couldn't save the one that counted. Where was my medal for the 8 months I sat in that bedroom and lost anyway? How do you accept applause for the one you managed to save, when it just reminds you of the one you didn't? There was a letter in those weeks. This part I do have firsthand in a way because it became public, the family of the little girl, Sophie's family, the Americans, they wrote to him. Through the army. A long letter, the mum wrote it, and bits of it got read out on the news, and there wasn't a dry eye in the country. She wrote about how Sophie hadn't slept right for a fortnight after, how she'd wake up crying, and how the only thing that calmed her down was when her mum would hold her and say the words, the guard's words, I've got you, nobody's getting past me. Sophie made her say them, every night, like a spell. And she wrote, this is the bit I remember exact, she wrote. I don't know what made you run toward my daughter when everyone else, including me, was running away. I will spend the rest of my life grateful that I never had to find out what would have happened if you hadn't. You gave me back my whole world. I hope someday someone gives you back yours. I hope someday someone gives you back yours. She didn't know about Danny when she wrote that. She couldn't have. But it's almost like she knew anyway. Like she could feel there was a hole in him that all the gratitude in the world couldn't fill. Tom wrote back, just once. A short letter, the mum said. She never made the whole thing public, and I respect her for that. But she shared one line with his permission much later. He wrote, You don't owe me anything. She reminded me of someone I loved very much. For 1 minute I got to keep him safe. Thank you for that. You gave me more than I gave you. You gave me more than I gave you. I think about that line a lot. A man who shielded a child with his own body, telling the child's mother that she'd done him the favor. Because for 60 seconds, with his arms around a frightened kid in the smoke, Tom Ellery got his little brother back. Got to win just once. Got to be fast enough. And then he had to let her go, the same as he had to let Danny go, and walk back to his post and stand there straight while the whole world fell down around him. Now, I told you I met his mother, a year and a half later, and I need to tell you how that happened because it's the reason I know any of this, and it's the reason I tell this story at all instead of keeping it to myself. After that trip after London, I went home a changed man. I won't pretend otherwise. You don't watch what I watched and stay the same. The divorce that had felt like the end of my world suddenly seemed very small. I'd seen a young man run toward a bomb to save a stranger's child. It rearranges your sense of what a problem is. I couldn't stop thinking about him. Tom. I followed the news about him until the news stopped, and it stops fast. That's the cruel thing. The country loves you for a fortnight and then forgets your name. I knew he'd turned down the medal. I knew about Danny by then. It had all come out. And then it went quiet. He went back to being a private soldier in a famous uniform, and the world moved on to the next thing. But I didn't move on. And about a year and a half after that morning, I did something a bit mad. I flew back to England, and I took a train up north to that little town I'd never heard of, the one where everybody's mum knows your business. Because I wanted to find him. I wanted to say thank you. Not for me, he never saved me. I was just a man with cold coffee watching from across the road. But somebody had to keep saying it. The country had forgotten and I couldn't, and it didn't seem right that a man could do a thing like that and just be allowed to disappear back into an ordinary life like it never happened. So I went looking, and in a small tea shop on the main street of his town, asking around like a fool, I ended up sitting across from a woman in her late 50s with pale, washed-out blue eyes that I recognized before she even told me her name. His mother. And what she told me in that tea shop, with her tea going cold the same way mine had on the worst morning of my life, that's the last part. That's part 3. Because Tom Ellery's story didn't end at Hyde Park, and the reason I had to go all the way to that little town to find it, the reason it wasn't in any newspaper, broke my heart in a way the bomb never did. Her name was Margaret, Tom's mother. She told me to call her Maggie, the way you do up there, where strangers become first names inside of 5 minutes. She didn't know me from anyone. I'd walked into her tea shop. Well, it wasn't her shop. She just worked there a few mornings a week. And I'd been asking around town about the Ellery family like an idiot, and somebody had pointed at her, and I'd gone bright red and tried to explain myself and made a complete hash of it. But when I finally got the words out, when I told her I'd been there that gray morning at Hyde Park, that I'd watched her son do what he did with my own eyes, something in her face changed. It softened and crumpled at the same time. She put down the cloth she was holding. She sat down across from me without being asked. And she said, "You saw him. You actually saw him." Like nobody ever had. Like for all the millions of people who'd watched the video, hardly anyone had ever actually seen her boy. I told her everything. The whole morning from my side. The cold coffee. The teenagers shouting boo. The little girl and the red balloon. The way he didn't move through the explosion and then moved like lightning when it counted. The way he walked back to his post afterward, no hat, filthy uniform, and stood there straight as a rail while strangers wept and clapped. She listened to all of it with her hand over her mouth, and when I got to the part about the words, "I've got you. Nobody's getting past me," she made a sound I've only heard a handful of times in my life. The sound a person makes when grief and pride try to come out of the same throat at once. "Those were Danny's words," she said. "He said them to Danny." "I know," I said. "I found out. I'm so sorry." And she told me about Danny, the whole of it, the slow year, the voices Tom did, the night through the bedroom door. I won't write it all again. I told you most of it already the way she told me. But hearing it from her in that little shop with the rain starting up outside, it was different. It wasn't a news story then. It was just a mum talking about her two boys, one of whom the world had briefly worshipped and one of whom the world had never heard of at all. Everyone wanted to know about Hyde Park, she said. Nobody ever wanted to know about Danny, and Danny was the bravest of the lot of them. You should have seen him at the end. 15, and he was the one comforting us. Then I asked the question I'd flown across an ocean to ask. I tried to make it light. I said something like, "So how's Tom doing now? Is he about? I'd love to shake his hand." And the shop went very quiet. And I felt my stomach drop because I thought, God help me. I genuinely thought for one cold second that she was about to tell me he'd died too. That whatever had taken Danny had a cruel sense of symmetry. That I'd come all this way to thank a man who was already gone. But that's not what she said. She said, he's not in the army anymore. I let her get to it in her own time. You learn that talking to people who have been through things. You don't push. You let the kettle boil at its own speed. Here's what she told me. Tom didn't fall apart at Hyde Park. He fell apart after, weeks after. Once the cameras were gone and the flowers had wilted and the country had moved on to whatever it moved on to. That's when it caught up with him. That's how it works, apparently. Maggie said the army doctor explained it to her later. You hold it all together while you have to. The body's clever like that. It waits until it's safe. And then, when the danger's gone and there's nothing left to stand guard against, the whole thing comes down at once. He stopped sleeping. He'd stand his post fine, the discipline never left him, the stillness that was bone deep. But the rest of him was coming apart underneath the red coat. He stopped eating much. He'd go home on leave and just sit in Danny's old room, Maggie said, in the dark for hours. Because here's the thing nobody in that cheering crowd understood. Saving Sophie didn't heal him. It opened him. For 60 seconds at Hyde Park he'd got to do the thing he'd failed to do for Danny, and the moment it was over, the failure came roaring back twice as loud. He'd proved he could save a child, which only made it hurt worse that he hadn't saved the one that was his. He'd come home, Maggie said, and he'd say, "Mum, I keep them all safe, all these strangers, the whole country, and I couldn't keep my own brother safe." And there's no answer to that. There's no thing you can say back to that. I tried. There isn't one. It got bad. She didn't dress it up, and I won't either, though I'll tread careful here. There was a stretch, about a year after Hyde Park, where Maggie was frightened. Properly frightened, the kind of frightened a mother doesn't get to put down. She'd already buried one son. She told me she used to lie awake doing the maths no mother should ever do. And the army, to their credit, she was firm about giving them their due. The army didn't throw him away. They got him help. Real help, the kind that takes a long time and doesn't make a good news story. And after a while, a long while, it became clear to everyone, Tom included, that the uniform wasn't the place for him anymore. That the thing that had made him such a good guardsman, that ability to stand still and hold the line against anything, was also the thing that had nearly killed him, because he'd used it to hold himself still, locked up tight, for far too long. So he left, quietly, the way he did everything. No headline. Guardsman of Hyde Park leaves army. It wasn't even a story by then. The world had forgotten he existed. And that, I thought, sitting in that tea shop, was the heartbreak she'd warned me about. The reason it wasn't in any newspaper. A young man does the bravest thing a country's seen in years, and the cost of it nearly destroys him in private while everyone who'd cheered moved on. That's the real story, I thought. The terrible, quiet ending nobody films. But I was wrong, because Maggie wasn't finished, and the look on her face wasn't a grief look anymore. "Do you want to know what he does now?" she said. And she got out her phone, this small woman with her reading glasses, fumbling with the phone the way people her age do, and she showed me a photo. It was Tom, older than the football shirt photo, older even than Hyde Park, a bit of gray starting at the sides already, though he couldn't have been more than 25, and he was sitting on the floor of a room I didn't recognize. A bright room, cartoons painted on the walls. And he had a book open on his knee, and he was clearly, obviously in the middle of doing a voice. His mouth wide open, eyes crossed, completely daft, and there were 3 or 4 children around him. Sick children, you could tell. The careful kind of bald and thin that you learn to recognize, and every single one of them was laughing. "He works at the hospice," Maggie said. "The children's one, the same one that looked after our Danny at the end." I didn't say anything, I couldn't. They were the only ones, she said, who ever knew how to talk to him about it. When everyone else wanted the hero, they just wanted to know how he was. So he started visiting, just visiting at first. And then he never really left. He reads to them, that's the main of it. He does the voices, the ones he used to do for Danny. He sits with the ones who are frightened, the ones who don't want to fall asleep because they're scared they won't wake up, and he holds their hand, and Maggie told me, she didn't even have to, I already knew, that he says the same words. "I've got you, you're all right, I've got you. Nobody's getting past me." The same words he said to Danny. The same words he said to Sophie in the smoke. The same 5 words over and over to one frightened child after another in a bright room with cartoons on the walls. He couldn't stand guard over Danny. He couldn't fight what was coming for his brother. Nobody could. But he found the one post in the whole world where he could stand and do exactly the thing he'd needed to do back then. He couldn't save them, most of them, the hospice being what it is, he can't save. But he can make sure not one of them is ever frightened and alone in the dark. Not one. Nobody's getting past him. He turned the worst thing that ever happened to him into the gentlest job a person could do. He took all that helplessness, and he found the one place it could become its opposite. That's not a medal you can pin on a chest. There's no ceremony for it. No one films it. It happens quietly every single day in a room most people will never see. And it's braver than running toward a bomb. I'm certain of it. Running toward a bomb takes 1 mad second of courage. What Tom does takes courage every single morning, walking back in, knowing some of the small faces from last week won't be there this week. Choosing to love them anyway. Choosing to keep standing his post. I asked Maggie if I could meet him. I'd come all that way. She thought about it for a long moment, and then she said gently, "I don't think so, love, and not because of you. It's just he spent so long being everyone's hero. He's finally somewhere where he's just Tom, just the bloke who does the voices. I don't want to be the one who brings Hyde Park back through the door." And I understood. Of course I did. The kindest thing I could do for him was to never meet him, to let him keep being just Tom. So I never did shake his hand. I flew home the next day. I never saw him again, and I never will. But before I left, Maggie reached across the table and held my hand in both of hers small hands, warm, and she said, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for not forgetting him. People forgot him so fast." And I said the only thing I could think of, which was the truth. I said I could never forget him. I think about him every single day. So that's the story. That's the whole of it finally, all the parts I spent so long collecting. I'm just a man who happened to be standing on a corner with a cold coffee on the worst morning of a lot of people's lives. I didn't do anything that day. I froze. I'll admit that to you plainly. When it mattered, I froze, and a child nearly went under the crowd. And it wasn't me who saved her. But I think maybe that's why I had to tell you all this. The ones who freeze, we've got a job too. We've got to remember. We've got to carry it. We've got to make sure that a young man who ran the right way, who shielded a stranger's child because she had his dead brother's frightened eyes, who turned his own broken heart into a lamp for other people's children, we've got to make sure he doesn't just vanish because the camera's left. There are heroes the whole world watches for 2 weeks and then forgets. And there are heroes sitting on the floor of a bright room right now, doing a silly voice, holding a small scared hand, saying I've got you. Nobody's getting past me and nobody's filming it, and nobody ever will. I know which kind I'd rather be remembered as. And I know which kind Tom Ellery turned out to be.